What's up everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I have my review of Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. Now if you know me, then you know that I love my Gundam anime because we go way back, ever since Gundam 1979 all the way up until today. I've seen the majority of Gundam out there. Now, I have to say that over the past few years, my interest in Gundam has really been waning, and I feel like the best that the franchise has to offer is clearly behind it at this point, because the most noteworthy shows that we've been getting over the past few years were shows along the lines of Gundam Origin, Gundam Thunderbolt, and we also had Gundam Unicorn as well, but these were just building upon the story that they created in 1979. But, you know, the only original Gundam stories that we've been getting were along the lines of Gundam Age, Gundam G-Reco, Gundam Build Fighters, and I thought Build Fighters was pretty cool, mostly because it had references to the old Gundam stuff, but I just was craving this new Gundam anime that had an original storyline to it and was actually very good. So is Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans that show that I've been looking for, and probably a lot of other people have been looking for as well? Let's find out. The story of Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans is set 300 years after the Great Calamity War, which, two things about that. First of all, if you've never seen another Gundam anime, the Calamity War is in no way, shape, or form related to any other Gundam anime out there, so if this is your first Gundam, you're still doing good, because you don't need to watch any of those to watch this one. Two, the Calamity War is a very vague name for a war, but in its defense, after watching the show, I feel like it's best if they were very vague about a lot of things about this war, because it is a big mystery. It's like this side story that we slowly learn about the history of the world that they live in and how everything came to pass. And I actually appreciated the fact that there was this big mystery surrounding this war that we slowly uncovered as we watched the series. So here we are, 300 years after this gigantic war, and humanity has taken the shape of living on Earth, living on colonies, and also living on Mars as well. And if you find yourself lucky, you're going to be born on Earth, because if you're born on Mars, they're not having a fun time out there. You have these children who are known as human debris due to conflict within the area. They're basically orphans, they're growing up as slaves, and they have this experimentation done to them where they have this system called the Alea Vijnana system basically implanted into their spine, which allows them to control the machines that they do all of the slave work with. So this is something that is not an easy procedure. A lot of people that get it, the majority of people who get this procedure just end up in the hospital for the rest of their life, so they're practically useless to a lot of these people, so they probably don't get the best of care. But those who do pass, they basically have a life of slavery, and here we see that this group of slaves, all of these human debris, they're not feeling being slaves for the rest of their life, so they're trying to fight back. And one thing that I feel about the story is that it has many similarities with Gurren Lagann. It gave me that feeling of, you have these people from the very beginning of the show, there are these destitute slaves, and they're trying to work, they're trying to fight for their own freedom, they're trying to fight for their family, and they're trying to shatter the system which has basically kept them down under everyone's boot for their entire life. Now, I know that's not the best comparison to make, because Gurren Lagann was just this extraordinary, out-of-this-world show where everything was over the top, but that's just a feeling that I get when I see where the characters in Iron-Blooded Orphans come from and where they end up. Of course, there are major differences with the story, such as Iron-Blooded Orphans is so much more believable in the way that it's told, dare I say, down-to-earth, despite the fact that they are on the Mars and they are in outer space for many episodes in the story. On top of that, the characters here are much less energetic and much less interesting as well, which kind of spoils part of what I want to say in this review, but I feel like the characters were really not that interesting, and they were a weak part, especially in the first quarter of the show. This is the type of anime where we're introduced to plenty bland characters, but over time, the events of the story actually cause them to develop into interesting characters. This is not my preferred method. I would prefer them to have strong characterization in the beginning and be very interesting characters, and then get developed on top of that. But this show here, say for example, we have the two main characters here, Orgus, and we also have Mikazuki. Orgus is my favorite character. I feel like he has the strongest internal struggle out of anyone in the story here, because he is the leader of it all. Whenever people die, which by the way, this is one of those shows that is not afraid to kill off some of the major cast of characters here. When they die, he is the one who bears the weight of their lives, basically, and he's the one who deals with the stress of all this, and we do see a change in his character through that. So while I like the character of Borga the most, it's Mikazuki, who is actually a very bland character, and he is actually the true protagonist of the story. We see him more than anybody else here, and he is someone who I assume is suffering through PTSD. However, he doesn't really show a lot of the symptoms. He doesn't have any traumatic flashbacks. We do get a lot of flashbacks to his past, but they don't really seem to bother him. He's just totally uninterested in anything. Oh, am I in battle here? Am I being injured? Oh, okay, I don't really use my brain cells that much anyway. He's said things like that in the show. Or whenever, even when it comes down to eating, like everybody else will think food is disgusting, and he's like, oh, I think this looks pretty good. It's actually an ongoing joke about how bad his taste is, because he will eat these nuts and he doesn't even peel the shell off. He'll like say to somebody, oh, you look hungry, have some of these nuts right here, and they eat them because they assume that he would have taken the shell off, but he didn't, because that's how he eats them. And you know, he's just totally disconnected from everything here, and that's one of the things about his character that I feel they could have improved upon if they were to implement some more symptoms of PTSD, I think, and have him really struggling and suffering with the memories and the things that are happening in his past, because I feel like he's a character that would work very well with that, because it seems like he's a child that's a slave who's also had these science experiments done to him, putting in the Alea Veniana system 3 times, by the way, so you would imagine that this would have some sort of effect on him. Now, that's not to say at all that Mikazuki doesn't have any development whatsoever. It's just that due to the fact that he is so emotionally disconnected, the only struggle that he really has are external struggles, and I'm going to get a little bit more into that whenever I talk about the plot. Kudelia Ina Bernstein is the incredibly spoiled daughter of one of the Mars representatives, and lately she's been an activist for some of the people on Mars, especially some of the human debris, and here we see in the beginning that she sets up this mission and she meets with a bunch of them, and you know, she really doesn't know how to interact with these people, but at the same time she inadvertently becomes this massive catalyst for the story, and everything that changes is really thanks to her and her being there for that mission in the beginning. Having said that though, I found her character to be very obnoxious, because she's one of these whiny characters of why do people have to fight, why can't we just have peace? And you know, that may not sound like a very bad thing, but when you watch a bunch of Gundam series, you know that every single Gundam anime has a character that's like that, and she was like that here. And I've got to say though, that's just the way that I feel about her. I think that her character in the story actually does work, because she's coming from essentially nobility. Of course, she's going to be spoiled, and she doesn't need to know how to do anything for herself because she has people doing it for her, but then she goes down here with these slaves basically, and she doesn't know anything. She doesn't know how to cook, she doesn't know how to relate to any of these people in order to interact with them, and that is natural for somebody that's coming from that type of situation. So her character actually does work in the story, and she does develop into quite a mature character, and I really enjoyed that she did that, but personally, I felt her to be kind of obnoxious in the first 12 episodes of the anime. Now, moving on to the plot, this is where I feel like Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans really stands up on its own and shines, and if it wasn't for some of the issues that I had with the characters, this would easily be one of my top, probably number 3 top favorite Gundam series of all time, because they did a really good job on the story here. It is complex, there's so much going on here, and it all goes somewhere. So in the beginning of the story, you've got 2 storylines that are there. First of all, you've got the fact that these characters are slaves, and secondly, you've got the mystery about the Calamity War that happened in the past. So the story of the slaves is actually going to go from the beginning of the story to the end of it, because that is actually our main characters here. We're going to see where they start off and where they end and everything in between here, and how these characters progress and how they adapt to the war that they're fighting here. But we also see that in the beginning, we're learning about the Alea Veniana system and also the Calamity War as well, and how they're connected. I think they did such a good job in creating the world that these characters are living in, simply because in the past, 300 years ago, you had the Calamity War. We don't know exactly what happened back then, and the reason for that is that a lot of the artifacts are lost. A lot of the history has been lost, and as the story continues, up until maybe 3/4 of the way through the anime series, we're learning more about what happened in this war, and we're actually learning what it was even about, because they are digging on Mars, they're uncovering new artifacts, and the only reason why they have the Gundam is actually because they dug it up, and they do find more things that they're digging up out of the ground here. So it's something that we're gradually learning about, but at the same time, the Gundams in the past are actually the reason why the Alea Viniana system works, and the Alea Viniana system connects with the Gundam and allows somebody to pilot it. And not only does this work very well in the story and in tying the past to the future here, and also some of the future plot points and us learning about the war in the past here, but it also fixes a problem that many Gundam fans have been really having an issue with for a long time. Now, if you've never seen any of the older Gundam anime, you'll know that there is something called a new type, which is basically somebody who is born in outer space that has a sixth sense, which creates a sort of spatial awareness inside of their mech, which, of course, you would assume that, okay, maybe they have an enhanced sense of spatial awareness, so they would see what's behind them or just have this feeling, but there's really no way for them to operate this machine faster than anyone else, because that's something totally different. That's reflexes. And, of course, the machine is actually bound by its limitations as a machine, but in Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans, the Alea Viniana system actually changes the buildup of the person's body who's actually running the Gundam here, or any machine, because it takes nanomachines from the machine itself and injects it into the person's bloodstream. And this is actually something that, for one, it allows them to have a reason for this enhanced sense of spatial awareness, because they essentially feel through the robots, through the nanomachines in their body here, but at the same time, it taxes them and it actually starts to break down their bodies over time. So there is actually a cause and effect here for them using it too much. So in addition to them doing a great job of explaining the things that happened in the past gradually over the entire story, they also do a pretty decent job of explaining how the world is set up in the way that it is in connection to the present and also the past as well. Keep in mind, this is no Legend of the Galactic Heroes or anything. You're not getting this incredible amount of detail with this. It's just kind of a vague thing in some areas. And, you know, one complaint that I have about some of the exposition in the story, about people explaining the Alea Viniana system or explaining some of the things that happened in the past, are that you'll have two people to each other and they'll kind of inadvertently talk to the audience here, because you'll have two people and one person will bring up something and another person will say, ah yes, the Alea Viniana system, and he'll explain all about it, when we know that the only other person in the room with him knows all about the stuff that he's saying here. So they could have done a better job with exposition, but I think the way that they explain things is just a minor throwback when considering everything that we learn about the story that we're watching here. On top of that, we see that not only are we learning about the main cast of characters, and not only are we learning about the world, but there's this large, expansive cast of side characters here as well, and we learn about their backstory and how this affects their family. One throwback to that, though, is that there's one character here, it's so hard to take him seriously. His name is Biscuit. He's got family members that are named Cookie and Cracker. Like... I don't know, that just doesn't make sense to me. This is not Dragon Ball Z, this is serious stuff here, and why do we have a character named Cookie, Cracker, and Biscuit here? It just really threw me for a loop, but we have a whole bunch of characters here that are side characters, and this is actually the way that I feel about the story, is that I liked the side characters. I had much more of a connection to these side characters than I did to the main characters. Of course, I loved Orga as a character, but I really had much more of a connection to all of these side characters. Maybe not so much Biscuit here, because his name Biscuit. Don't name your kids Biscuit, people. I guess at that point, if you're going to name your kids Biscuit, Cookie, and Cracker, you're probably far beyond anything that I can help you with. But anyways, we've got all of these side characters, and we learn about their backstories, and we see their personal stories progress, and sometimes they don't get to a conclusion here because they get killed off sometimes. And that's one of the things about the show, too, is that it is not afraid to kill off some of the characters here, regardless of their level of impact in the story here. Everyone's up on the chopping block in this story, and that's one of the things that really kept me on edge, because I didn't know what was going to happen in some of these battles. Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans is also an anime that has a strong grasp of cause and effect. Like, you'll have times where, say for example in the beginning of the story, where our characters, they basically rise up and they take control of the organization. They'll realize that after paying the cost for certain things, like they've got a list of things they've got to pay the cost of, they're not left with a whole bunch of money. And considering the fact that they don't really have a whole lot of money, and other times in the anime series they won't have a whole lot of money, this will actually impact or limit their options in a lot of the things that they can do here. So I really enjoyed how that works here, because a lot of anime, they don't have a strong grasp of cause and effect, and something will happen to the characters and it really will not impact the story as a whole, unlike with Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. Of course, I also talked about how the Alea Viniana system will impact some of the characters here as well. Now let's talk a bit about the battles here, because they did an outstanding job with the fights. So first of all, we see War on Mars, in outer space, and also on Earth as well. So there's all these different areas, and that actually comes into play in the fights because, as you know, in space they will be flying around, on Earth they're on ground, so it's a completely different type of combat here. But there's also a level of strategy present as well. Like, say for example, with the Barbatos, which is actually the main star Gundam of the show that is piloted by Mikazuki, we'll see that they don't exactly have all of the right pieces that they need for it, or maybe because they're in this destitute area and they're just slaves, that it doesn't have some of the correct pieces in it, like the cockpit is wrong. But there's one time where one of the thrusters is not coated in the correct material to protect it, and we see that one of the enemies that he's fighting against is actually aiming for that thruster because it's actually the weak point of the ship there. So we see that, but we also see that these battles are so intense because you'll have these characters, and I don't know how they do it. It's like they're sitting in the cockpit and they're talking to each other. I guess there's speakers and a microphone in there or something like that, but we'll have these intense battles where there's this weapon, like just one instance here, there's this weapon that's like the jaws of death. It transforms like from a sword into these big jaws kind of, and there will be times when your characters are in the cockpit and they're just screaming and just cursing at the person who they're fighting against, but they take these jaws and they clamp it around the cockpit of the mobile suit, and you see the cockpit just smash, and the person is just turned into mush on the inside because they're just being smashed and flattened in between the cockpit because of these giant jaws of death. And that's one of the things about the story. Everybody's on the chopping block, and when people do die, it is pretty gruesome here, and that's actually something that really stayed faithful to the original Gundam series because they call them Kill 'Em All Tomio for a reason. I also love the attention to detail with these mobile suits because sometimes the armor is taken off and they're being repaired, or their armor is destroyed mid-battle and you see these pieces just flying away, and you can see the skeleton of the mobile suit underneath it. And I thought it was all correct because I don't know if you guys know this, but I've built my fair share of Gundam model kits, so I know what the inner skeleton of these mobile suits should be looking like, and they really did put a lot of detail into that. Now let's talk a bit about the ending here, and I'm not going to go in detail and spoil you guys or anything because this is a spoiler-free review. Just like the majority of my other reviews that I make, I do not want to ruin that experience for you guys, but the ending for me, I thought they did a good job of this because there were times that characters were just dying off, and I did not know what was going to happen when it was coming around to the ending. Like, for the last 10 episodes of the anime, I had no idea. There were some times that characters would, like, they would be here 1 minute, something would happen, and then they're gone. It's just so random like that because people will coordinate assassinations on these characters, so they really do go all out, and nobody is safe here. But I felt like the ending did a pretty good job of wrapping itself up, and this is totally a complete experience here, and I did enjoy the ending, but at the same time, I feel like the show, not only does it suffer from having a few uninteresting characters, I just really didn't care about the villains either, and I feel like the Gundam series is something which, for one, a lot of times it blurred the line between good and evil, and two, it always had villains that were tied into the history of the story, and they did that slightly here, but I felt like the villains here, I really wasn't interested in them like I was with, you had other characters like Zex Marquise or Shah Aznable, just to name a few. You know, those were interesting characters because they were tied into the story, but I just really didn't feel any sort of connection with the villains of the story. But having said that, the ending of this just beautifully wrapped everything up, and I had no idea what was going to happen. So let's move on to the presentation, starting off with the art and animation. Now, the animation itself, I feel like they did a great job with that. It was consistent, and I have no problems with that, so they did a good job there. But in terms of its art, you know, I feel like it was a bit inconsistent because it would go from beautiful to just alright at times, and there were a few times and it looked pretty bad. Like, for example, whenever a character was a little bit further away from the screen, like this. What can I say? I guess they were rushing, not that that's a valid excuse for that, but that's kind of how it is when things are up close or whenever there's a big moment that's going on. Everything, they did a good job in adding all of the detail there. Like I said, with the mobile suits, I give them a big golden star for not using CG for that, and there are times when, especially nowadays, because so many anime, so many mecha anime are just total CG now. We do have CG, but they are actually the spaceships, and still, even at that, they did a really good job in terms of creating the spaceship. Never once had the immersion broke for me due to bad CG or anything like that, but in terms of the detail of the mobile suits, we would have times where we'd have the panels breaking off and we could see all the details underneath the armor, like I said, and then other times where it kind of looked like a mess of lines when the mobile suits are obscured by smoke or further away in the distance, and it was really hard to make out what we were looking at sometimes. Of course, I feel like it was more good than bad, and the issues that I had were something minor, but it's still something I felt were worth pointing out. Of course, like I said, also with the characters, sometimes when they're further away, they don't look exactly right, but overall I felt like this had a very strong sense of beauty to it when I was watching it. So let's talk a bit about the audio here, starting off with the music. They had this opening song in the beginning. I really loved it, Raise Your Flag, or whatever it's called, from whoever it's from, not looking it up, but I really enjoyed that. I thought they did a great job with that, and it was stuck in my head even when I wasn't watching the anime. All the other openings and all the other closings, they were good too, but they were never quite stuck in my head and never really got me hyped up to watch the show like that one did. As far as the background music goes, usually I don't really care about this so much. I usually don't talk about that because this is one of the cases for me. If they do a good job, then I usually don't notice it because I'm so into the moment, but sometimes there's some background music that really will take you out of it and then you will notice it. So this is my experience here. The background music, I have no complaints about it in terms of quality, but they just don't have a very large selection. Like there's this one song that they'll play while they're doing their strategy and they're planning everything out and they're on the ship just talking to each other, but they play that song every single episode, and it's not bad by any means, but it's just like, oh, the scene begins and here's that song again. It's just one of those situations right there. It's not bad, like I said, you just get tired of listening to it after a while. Now, as far as the voice acting is concerned, Japanese voice acting, don't speak Japanese, so I really have no right to complain it, but it sounded pretty good, and that's how I watched the second season. I watched the first season in English simply because that's how I wanted to watch it, and that is all that is available in English, and I think they did a pretty good job with the English dub as well, so I would recommend this, but you're going to have to switch over to watching it sub because that's not going to be available. Whenever it does come out, if it's available, whenever this review comes up, then I would recommend watching it in dub because I think they did a good job with that. So moving on to my final thoughts, first of all, if you've never watched a Gundam anime before and you would like to try, I would personally recommend watching Gundam War in the Pocket or Gundam Thunderbolt simply because they can be viewed over a few hours, and they're very quick to watch, but I wouldn't say that they're exactly indicative of what the true Gundam experience is, because the majority of Gundam anime out there are about 50 episodes long, and if you're trying to get that true Gundam experience, then I would have to say the Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans should be the first Gundam that you try if you're looking for something longer, and I feel like I'm probably dodging some of the purest Gundam fan out their shoes right now because a lot of the other shows out there, they're very good too, like the original Gundam series, for example, but I don't feel like anybody who's new to the franchise would be able to sit through 40-some episodes of something from 1970s because I'm aware that people may not have the tolerance of watching something from that age. Personally, I would recommend that show as well, but I think Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans does enough to not only draw on the fans of modern-day anime, but also it's a pretty good story on its own. And, you know, there is the issue that I have about the characters there, but like I said, things do get better and the characters do develop. So secondly, if you already are a big fan of Gundam, then you should definitely check out Iron-Blooded Orphans. But I have to say, and give you this warning, at first, you're probably not going to like it too much first of all, like I said, the characters really are not that interesting. Secondly, you're going to find a lot of the staples in Gundam anime. And, you know, one of the reasons why I really like this anime is because they take a lot of these staples and they basically reinvent them. Like I said, with a new type system, I think they did a great job in introducing the Alea Vignana system, and they did everything, but they made it much more believable than it was in the early Gundam days. So I would have to say that if you watch past 12 episodes of this anime, you're probably going to get hooked, and you're definitely going to enjoy the ride that you get, because it is a pretty good story that just doesn't have the most interesting characters that are driving it. So if you've seen Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans, let me know your thoughts about it in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all of my anime reviews, news, discussions, and lists. And if you'd like to help support the channel, be sure to check out the Patreon, because there's all sorts of bonuses there where we have Discord chats, we watch movies together, you guys can choose one anime series that I review per month over there, which, by the way, I need you guys to participate in this poll that I have, because once a month I let people vote on the anime that I review over there on Patreon, and I actually have a tie right now, so I need you guys to break the tie for me to choose which anime that I review this month after Showaken Roku, which is going to be the next anime series that I review after this. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.